this to go down there. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my studio, live on the air. My name's Michael Markowsky. Today we're going to recreate another painting by another one of my very favorite artists. Today we are going right for the big fish today. We are going to be looking at the art of William Turner. And William Turner is the most beloved artist in the history of England, one of the towering giants of art history, so much so that the most prestigious award for art in the world, even though it's really only given to British artists, is called the Turner Prize. And if you know, even if you're not a big fan of art, or which I don't know why you'd be watching, but the Turner Prize annually is sort of one of the most talked about events in English culture, often because there's lots of controversy of the artists that are chosen, the nominees, and then who ultimately wins it. But it sort of gives you an idea that the award, obviously named, the Turner Prize is named after William Turner because he is such a giant, considered to be, I don't know if you would consider to be the greatest artist in English history, but an artist that really represents, at least in my mind, the English identity, for better or worse, right? And we'll get into that here. This is the painting that I've decided to paint today, which is insane because it's, you know, probably one of the top 5 paintings he ever did. But I love this painting. I love the color in it. It really feels to me very representational of Turner's style and his paintings. We're going to look at a whole bunch of other paintings. It's also the idea of trying to do this in maybe 2 or 3 hours is there's very few paintings that we do where I feel pretty stressed out right now. So we're going to tackle this one, and I'll let you know right off the top that there's an outline for today's painting, which you can download from a Dropbox folder in the video description below. So let's just take a look at that right now. Here's a movie we'll talk about in a bit here. If you click in this Dropbox folder, you're going to see lots and lots of files, because today this is painting 170. We've done 170 of these paintings. Many of these folders have 2, 3, 5, 8 paintings inside of them, depending on the artist. And we've done a whole week on Picasso and Vincent van Gogh, etc. So where are we? We go down here, JMW Turner, and you're going to see in here we've got a lot of files in here. Now we're going to focus on these 3 here: the burning of the Houses of Lords and Commons from 1835. So but I'll show you what else is in here. Now, in the future, I'm going to be doing a few other episodes dedicated to him. So in that Dropbox folder, you will see this image, the original painting, as well as 2 versions, the outline, a JPEG and a PDF. And then I want to show 3 other paintings, which I consider to be amongst his most important paintings of all. The Fighting Temeraire, which is this sort of important boat in English history that's being pulled by a tugboat to be dismantled by the wreckers. And of course there's an outline for that. There is here Snowstorm, steamboat off a harbor's mouth, which is sort of infamous because Turner claims to have tied himself to the mast of a boat in order to, so that rather than hiding underneath the boat, he's strapped to the mast of the boat as the wind is lashing onto his face. And so of course there's the outline for that. So that's and then here is another very famous painting of his, Rain, Steam, and Speed, which shows a train speeding towards us viewers here in the painting, and of course an outline for that as well. So you could certainly do all 4 of them. We are going to do the other 3 at a date to be determined at some point down the road here. But there's the outline. I'm going to show you how to transfer that outline in a few moments. I want to let you know that there's a private Facebook group just for people like yourself who've tuned in and who are watching today. And looks like Pascal has been busy. Look at that. Awesome. So what I encourage you to do, just like Pascal's done, is take a picture of the art that you're working on now. Maybe it's a painting that you're making at the same time you're watching me paint. Maybe you're going to be painting Turner's painting that I'm doing today. Or maybe you're just listening while you're working on something else that's important to you. So I would love to see whatever it is that you're working on. And what's great about this community is it's very active. There's people posting things, you know, every couple of hours there's a new painting that someone's... I think that's super inspiring, right? Like here's Judy's painting of a Lauren Harris painting we did about a year ago. That's so exciting. So there's people who have just joined us, and there's people who've been painting with me for almost 2 years now. So, you know, if you are really thinking about getting into painting and you want to join a really, you know, strong group of artists, this would be a great place to join up, because there's people at the very beginning of the painting journey who are just getting started and just learning some of the very basics in some of the first episodes we've done, and there's people who are much further along that have that are now doing commissioned artwork and selling and exhibiting their artwork, which just makes me so happy as a teacher of art. This is what I've devoted my life to doing, so seeing people like yourself who are embracing this, it makes me feel like I'm doing something useful with my life. So we're going to talk about Turner here in a second and his biography. And I see the robots that are spamming the chat have already begun. No time to waste here. And I see Pascal's here. Paula's on watching, so great. I'm not going to read all the comments here, but until a little bit later when I have a moment to pause. So let's come back to that in a second. What I do want to just mention right off the bat is, you'll recall, well, 6 days ago we began a couple of paintings on J.M.W, a really important American artist that used a lot of texture. And here is, I made this out of Celluclay, and I put some bottles on here to help speed up, or not to speed up, but to help the drying process, because this Celluclay is about, you know, in some places an inch thick, in some places not quite as thick. But putting some containers like that just to help the drying process is going to keep it from warping and bending. And man, it's still a little bit wet. I can still feel a little bit of flex in here. One of the things, we're going to move on to the painting that we're going to do today, of course, but I just thought, you know, if you're doing something similar, what I noticed, like when it's all dry, it's going to go almost like as white as this mouse, right? Until then, you're going to get some areas like this. It almost sort of looks like if you've had, you know, avocado toast and it starts to go a little bit brown. As it dries, the outer side kind of dries first, and then some of the water inside is still trying to escape, and it kind of discolors, but then eventually goes white again, right? You can see some of the really thin parts on the that have already certainly dried are much more white, right? So eventually we will, I'm going to finish this painting, but I really want to wait until this is bone dry. So I'm just going to move that off to the side. Okay. So let's look at how to transfer the image from the Dropbox onto the canvas. So I'm going to play a video because I've already done this, and I'm going to talk over it as it's playing here. So you can see I'm about to paint on top of a 9x12 sized canvas. You can get the exact one that I'm using. There's an Amazon link in the description. And I've also printed the outline off from the Dropbox on my regular inkjet printer here at home. You can use a LaserJet printer, you can use a photocopier at work or at a local, post office or whatever that allows you to print from a USB stick if you want. And then here I'm using some carbon paper. This is single-sided carbon paper. You can use graphite paper. You just saw there's some white graphite paper, and you can buy graphite paper. If you can't find it at an art supply store, you can usually find it at your fabric store, because that's what people use to transfer patterns onto fabric, right, before they cut them out and sew them. So you're going to see I'm not going to draw over all of the lines, because a lot of this is going to get covered up. This is really just to help with the composition. Now we're going to talk a lot about this painting and its history, why it looks the way it does here. And there's a lot of detail in those figures. I've removed them here, and that's what it looks like once you've got it all done. And make sure you take a good little look to make sure everything has indeed been transferred before you peel the sheet off of the or take the tape off, because you don't want to peel it off and go like, whoa, I forgot the bridge. Oh, and trust me, I know it sounds obvious, but I have done that many times before, and then you're like, oh, trying to get that paper to line back up after you've taken the tape off, not going to happen. It's going to be really tricky to do. There are ways to solve that problem, but we're not going to cover them today. So now we've got this image here. You can see it's very, very basic. And this would be not too far off what I imagine Turner would have done in terms of sketching. Now, Turner, one of the things that makes me anxious about doing today's episode is because Turner is this giant of art. There's people who've dedicated their entire lives to the study of William Turner and his technique and process, and who have written PhD theses on it, who will watch this and just shake their head at how I've completely skipped over important aspects of his painting process. So I just want to acknowledge right off the top that I am going to do my best to capture the spirit of William Turner's process. There are other videos on the internet that really dive down into his technique and process and the pigments he used. We're not really going to go into all that. We're going to do a little bit of, we're basically going to paint it in using techniques that he would have done, because the other big thing with William Turner is that he experimented a lot with different materials, different painting techniques. He was a real innovator, and that's one of the reasons why he's so important to artists of the time, and even to today, because of sort of fearlessness with his materials. So the first thing I'm going to do, and I do this almost every episode, is I'm going to put some yellow paint onto the surface here. Now, Turner probably made a brown. If you wanted to use a brown, basically you just take this warm yellow, mix a little bit of warm red, and a little bit of even less warm blue. And then you mix it together and you're going to get a brown. Basically, you could think of like orange plus blue makes brown, or green plus red makes brown. Essentially, it's your three so-called primary colors. In this case, I'm going for a warm primary. So I just realized I forgot my water. Give me 1 second here. Okay. So I'm just going to use some water right from the tap. It's a little bit cloudy. It's not hot or cold, just kind of room temperature. And that's maybe a little much. There's water on the canvas. That's okay, because we're going to paint all over it. This is the only time I ever use water when I'm painting with acrylics. because water makes the paint more transparent. It breaks down the bonds that hold the pigment together. So really what we're doing is more like staining the canvas. And this is a technique that artists have been using for 500 years. They weren't using acrylic paint 500 years ago because it didn't exist. But this technique is called the imprimatura, or the first layer, as the Italian Renaissance painters called it. And the idea is actually to save time by using a color that is predominant within a composition. It helps what would be another way? I love analogies because I like thinking of like ways to try to communicate these ideas to especially beginner painters. It's like, what would it be like, seasoning a pan before you cook in it? You know, you put some garlic and onions into the soup bowl and heat them up, and so that before you even put in your broth or whatever, you've already got, there's a little bit of a flavor in there. And of course, you know, when we look at the original painting again here in a few moments, you know, it's kind of glowing with the warm, the ultra hot fire of the Parliament buildings. So this sort of makes sense. Now, a bit of this may show through the very, very end. Well, all of it will show. Will you be able to see it or consciously see it is the question. So, got my base layer on. Let's move that out of the way. I'm going to let this dry. While that's drying, I'm just going to get my palette set up here. Okay. Oops. Got my little labels on here to help me. Well, it does help me actually. Sometimes it's when the palette gets covered in paint. It's a little bit helpful for me to be able just to really quickly glance down and see the names of colors. But I think it's also primarily I do that just for those of you watching, so that if I forget to point out what color I'm using, you can just see pretty quickly for yourself. If you want to get the exact paints that I'm using, there's links in the video description to buy all of them. You don't need to use this brand. I'm not sponsored by this brand. Obviously, if you do use these, you're probably going to get a little bit, might make your life a little bit easier. But every brand of paint makes these colors. These are the most common colors used. That's why they always come in the bigger tubes. You know, you'll notice paint companies will have hundreds of different colors on the shelves, and then there's going to be like 10 that are a little bit bigger. You know, there might be a green and a purple version of these, which I don't use because we can mix colors that are almost as bright as those greens and purples. Not maybe exactly quite as bright, but we get about 98% of the way there, right? And not only is it helpful for you to learn how to mix the colors on your own, but by having a very simple palette like this, or a limited palette, all of the colors are going to mix really well, and we're not going to have any kind of odd colors that don't seem to fit in with anything else, which is, I've talked about this many times, was one of the things I learned the hard way. When I was just starting out as an artist, I was successful early on, and the first thing I did was went to the art supply store and spent hundreds and hundreds of dollars on I bought all the paint. So, and then all my paintings went downhill very quickly, and like, why are my paintings not as good as they were when I was had you know, a handful of colors like this, and now I've got every color you could ever want, and my paintings look all muddy and there's clashing colors. What is going on? And again, the analogy I always use is, it's like if you're a chef and you have, you know, 5 or 6 high quality ingredients, you can make a really good meal. But you could also take 50 high quality ingredients and throw them all into one bowl and mix it up, and people are like, whoa, what do you got in here? Like chocolate and lavender and truffles and coffee grounds and lobster. Like, wow, this is gross. There's just too much in here, right? It's the same sort of thing. A limited palette is your best friend. It's also way cheaper. So let's get into the painting here. Let's talk a little bit about who William Turner was. Okay, so first of all, he's also known as J.M.W. Turner. You've probably seen that before. His full name is Joseph Mallard William Turner. Most people would call him William Turner, or even just Turner, right? Turner was born in 1775 and dies at the age of 76 in 1851. During that period of time, he becomes the most successful artist in England. There were other artists that you know, rivaled him and were equally as well known before and certainly afterwards, but he was sort of embraced in a way other artists have not necessarily been. One of the reasons why is that he's born from a, I guess you could call it like a lower middle class family, and in a relatively poor part of London, England. He was born in London, lived in London, died, I think, near London, Chelsea, and you know, he had this like real thick Cockney accent. Like if you think of, you know, where Christmas is right around the corner, that like those Charles Dickens plays, and you know, everyone talk. I'm not even going to do an English accent because all people are going to immediately turn away. But when you think of like that real, like the newsboy kind of Tale of Two Cities, again, like any Dickens play, you can think of like that real thick Cockney accent. And Turner had a Cockney accent like that, and he never made any effort to get rid of it, which is kind of unusual because I went to the Royal Academy of Art, where he also went, which is the biggest art school in London. Sorry, I went to the Royal College of Art, but I stayed with the head of the Royal Academy. But I spent a lot of time at the Royal Academy, and one of the things, I just got distracted here thinking about that. One thing I learned about like English society is, even to this day, it's still quite stratified. And unlike here in Canada or the United States, although to a certain extent, you can kind of tell where someone is in the socio-economic stratification of English society based upon their accent, right? And the Cockney accent is sort of a telltale giveaway of someone who might not have reached, you know, the highest level of education than someone who has the perfect Queen's English, for instance, right? But I think it shows, I think even just that example shows his stubbornness, his unwillingness in any way whatsoever to change himself, to accommodate other people's sense of taste. He's just like, this is who I am, take it or leave it. My art stands on its own. If you think I'm just some dirt poor, trailer trash guy, go ahead, but my paintings are better than anyone else's paintings. Bah, right? There's like this real bravado that one gets from him. And he was a kind of a surly, kind of grumpy guy. You know, I think of him, he reminds me a lot of like a Winston Churchill kind of figure. Kind of like, especially towards the end of his life, he's a bit of a portly fellow and grumpy and mumbling under his voice. There is a, you know, just while I'm here, a pretty good film. You know, it's interesting. Look at here. This is called Mr. Turner. It came out, 2014. Biography on him. And look at the 97% of like professional critics loved it. They thought it was a great film. Audience, 56%. Most people thought it was like, whatever. So how do you... Take that what you will. It is a pretty good film. I enjoyed it. But in that, I think the actor does a very good job of portraying kind of the personality of William Turner. We'll talk about his biography as we go here. I just think it might be kind of nice just to take a look at his art as we do so. So, you know, he is, again, 1775 is when he's born. You can see these are the paintings that he's making at, age 12, 13 years old. So he was a prodigy. He starts studying at the Royal Academy of Art at age 14, right? So, you know, just like someone going to law school at age 14 or medical school at age 14, especially back in that point in time, to be that young in art school, which even to this day, you know, I teach at art university here in Vancouver, Emily Carr University, and if there was a 14-year-old in my classroom, it would be very unusual. Not unheard of, but it would be very unusual. But even back then, you know, again, we're talking 150 plus years ago, that would have been very unusual, because most of the time artists were a little bit older. You know, they often had a different profession and would study art in the evenings and weekends, or even after they've retired. So here you've got a young kid who's in the same classroom as people who might be in their 40s and 50s, right? Anyway, so you would just get an idea, like, these are pretty strong paintings for someone who is, you know, he's like 18 years old now. Here's his self-portrait. Would he have been like 24 when he painted that? So a lot of his earlier paintings follow the academic tradition, which is what he learned at the Royal Academy, right? And, you know, these are great paintings by any means. You know, even if he never made a painting by the time he turned 30, he would still be acknowledged as one of the greatest artists of all time. But it's kind of, we're starting to kind of get into it around here, like the Shipwreck. That's a famous painting of his from that kind of earlier period of his life. But you could see one of the things that Turner starts doing is he starts doing doing a lot of traveling and taking his sketchbook, and I think it might be worth, which I've got a lot of links open here. I think it might be just worth just jumping to this and taking a look at what his sketchbooks look like. So he would carry these little journals around with him, and he would make these notes, right? So he would write down, like, okay, here's a sunset, and here's the colors I saw when I was on the Tuscan seaside, or I was outside of Florence and I saw this sunrise. And so he's making these notes and these really quick watercolor paintings. So this sketchbook's 1884, so it's about 10 years after today's painting. But first of all, I think seeing this type of drawing, I teach drawing and I teach painting, obviously, but most beginner artists, you know, if they had done something like this, would be horrified and embarrassed. They wouldn't want to show it. And I think it's important to see that this is what one of the greatest artists in human history, this is what his sketchbook looked like, right? Your sketchbook doesn't have to be full of perfect finished drawings. Even, and like, look at these really quick paintings. Like, I'm not sure what that is. Is that a windmill? Is that a boat in the waves? I'm not sure. But it almost looks like him mixing paint, but this is like he's trying to express like the intensity of like sunrise, sunsets, storms, etc., right? And Turner is known as a romantic painter, right? And the romantic era follows the age of enlightenment. So in the 1600s, 1700s, you have a bunch of artists that are obsessed with classical, mostly Roman and Greek sculpture, right? There's all these discoveries of Pompeii, and you have all of this exploration, and it's the age of colonialism, so ships are going to Egypt and they're finding ancient sculptures. They're digging up all the pharaohs, and so there's this intense interest in the classical era. And there's also this interest in philosophy and writing, and the idea of reason, that reason can solve everything if we can think our way out of any situation. And so that's the kind of paintings we see at the beginning, this very structured approach to painting and drawing. Turner ushers in, along with a number of other artists, the Romantic era, which is kind of the rejection of that pure reason and turning towards emotion, and starting to try to convey the power of nature. Right? There's a fascination with nature, and this idea, this growing concept of what's called the sublime. And that's that's a loaded word in art, and people again have written theses about it. But essentially, it's the awe of the destructive power of nature, right? Like the awe of a tsunami wave or a volcano erupting and being like, oh, that is the most terrifying thing I've ever seen, and simultaneously the most beautiful image I will have ever as you get covered in water or lava, right? And so trying to capture the sublime, the raw power of nature, and then also the feelings that might evoke within us, right? And so Turner is using color to convey what's not only that he sees, but what's going on inside him, right? And probably the most famous writer of the Romantic era is Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. And again, thinking of Frankenstein, it's like this human that's being cobbled together by other human parts and turned into this monster. And it's like it's a horror that expresses the anxiety of where science is going, right? Yeah, we might be able to bring someone back from the dead and cobble them together from other human parts, but is that a good idea, right? So that's, again, I think that's a perfect example of what the Romantic era is, right? And we see these paintings get looser and looser and looser, right? There's still some structure in here, but they're just getting wilder and wilder, right? And the colors are starting to get a little bit more vibrant. Here's today's painting. Let's go. I'm just going to zoom a little bit further down here towards some of the end. So again, here's one of the paintings that I suggested you could possibly make: the snowstorm, the morning after the deluge, right? So some of these paintings, and many of them are on display. There's several rooms at the Tate Britain Museum in London, which is, there's the Tate Modern, which is probably more famous today because there's always lots of, modern contemporary art on display there. But the Tate Britain is sort of the depository of England's most important art. Obviously, there's the National Gallery and the National Portrait Gallery, which are trying to be more exhaustive and also display a lot of art from elsewhere around the world. The Tate Britain mostly focuses on important British art, and there's several big rooms dedicated to Turner. And some of those last paintings are almost totally abstract, and you might see, you're like, what? Oh, is that a boat in there, or what am I? It's just a swirl of color. And so he's often seen as like the grandfather of Impressionism, or of abstraction, right? A lot of this, what we're looking here, are watercolor paintings, which are amazing. Turner and his watercolors. I used to paint in watercolor, and when I was a student at the Royal College, there was an exhibition at the Royal Academy. Again, I was staying with the head of the Royal Academy when I was in London, and there was an incredible, like, not even that big of an exhibition of his watercolors, and many of these paintings are like this big, you know, like they're like a little bit bigger than a postage stamp, smaller than half the size of a postcard. And inside this little painting would be a vista, like a waterfall and mountains. The kind of, you feel like, you know, Alice in Wonderland, like a little doorway you're opening up, and you feel like you could step into them, right? It's just like, how, and I remember I spent a whole day, and I was one of the only persons in that exhibition for the whole day, or certainly at any point in time, and just being like, I don't know if I can paint in watercolors anymore. Like I've just seen the top of the mountain here. That's the peak of Mount Everest, and I didn't realize how far away from that peak I have been this whole time until I was like flown up to the top there, and then dropped back down and said, okay, climb back. And you're like, wow, that's a long way to go. So anyway, that just gives you an idea of, you know, of how I think of this artist. I have nothing but the deepest, utmost respect for his ability, his talent. And I think Turner probably, to me, seems like kind of the perfect example of an artist's artist, right? Someone who is just infinitely skilled, can deploy that skill effortlessly and with incredible confidence, and in all sorts of different kinds of subject matter, who straddles, you know, the end of the Age of Enlightenment, and then moves into the Romantic era, and it's just unbelievable. I'm just gonna refresh the screen here. Hopefully you can still see me. I just saw the spinning beach ball of death there on YouTube, so we will see. You let me know in the comments if I'm still live and on the air, or if I'm not sure what's going on here. It looks like, anyway. So I'm just gonna get started. I'm recording it, so if the worst comes to worst, I could just upload this video. So I've got my canvas here, and how are we going to replicate this painting? What am I doing to myself? Why? Okay, so one of the things that he's done is he's using both classical techniques to paint much of this painting, and then he's also using a palette knife for some of it. So, and he uses the palette knife particularly right at the end to smear some paint over here, which is kind of a daunting thing. Imagine, and we're going to do this, or I'm going to do it, you're welcome just to watch, but imagine finishing the painting and are getting pretty darn close, and then taking a big gob of paint and then just start smearing it onto the finished, or what might otherwise be considered a finished painting, right? That's the, like, the confidence that he oozes from every part of his body when he gets to that point in the painting. Okay, so I think, you know, when I look at this painting, I see a lot of color. Oh, cool. So Pascal and Lolly said they could still see and hear me, but the sound was weird for a second. Okay, that's cool. I see it spinning again. I don't know what's going on. So I think what I'm going to do is start out with my cool blue in the background, and then, yeah, so I'm going to approach the painting as I normally would, and then we're just going to leave that wild ending to the ending, and we'll see how that goes. So another thing that Turner would have done a lot of is, what's fascinating is he's in, even in this painting, he's using both very thin layers of paint, like using a glazing technique. So I'm going to use some glazing fluid. You're going to see I'm using a satin, or otherwise known as a matte glazing fluid. So I'm going to use some of this in various different places. And then again, at the very end, he's using thick gobs of paint with a palette knife. I mean, there's very few other artists, even to this day, who would literally use the two opposite painting techniques in one painting. And we talked about this a little while ago. Someone was saying, like, shouldn't you sort of choose one technique or the other? And I say, yeah, you probably should. Turner's sort of, and again, is the perfect example of the exception to the rule, of someone who's like, yeah, that's a great technique. That's a great technique too. Let's just put them all together. And everyone else is like, no, what are you doing? You're crazy. And then he pulls it off, and we're like, okay, what? Okay, great. Okay, so now you've just shown us all up, made us all look like fools. So let's start out. I want to get a really cool blue. So I'm going to take my cool blue and a little bit of white. That was a little, that's, well, actually not bad. I'm going to paint with that. I'm also going to take just a little bit of yellow. And I got this blue that is pretty intense. And we're going to put that all over the sky. And it's going to be darker in some places. Obviously, kind of towards the right corner, it's a little bit thicker. But we're going to basically paint it all over everywhere here. Because he's building, like, it's kind of hard to see, but he's building up. There's this blue is almost everywhere. Maybe a little bit less so, but I can even see it in this area here. And then he's glazing with a little bit of a purple here, right? Some warmer colors as he gets towards the foreground. And there's a little bit of that blue down here, right? So I'm going to put some of my glazing fluid in. So what this does is it preserves the color, but it makes it a lot more transparent. So it looks otherwise exactly the same here, but when I paint it on here, it's going to behave much differently. If I painted that kind of teal that I just mixed right on here, it would just obliterate the yellow. Whereas right now, I'm going to have a bit of that yellow coming through, mixing optically with this color. So I'm going to put them side by side here so we can just sort of see a little bit. You know, if you're really afraid of how this is going to turn out, maybe paint in this area where ultimately we're going to paint gobs of paint over top of it, so you can kind of be a little bit more experimental in those areas. And this is why I said don't worry about making it perfect, because we're going to paint over big areas of color here. Right, you can see I'm kind of like scrubbing it down again because we're going to be putting lots of layers of paint in here. And I'm probably going to put a second layer there as well. I'm also going to take this color. I'm going to put it down here into the water a little bit. And just sort of brush it out. Right, and if you feel like you've gone a little bit far, you can take a rag and you can kind of just wipe a bit of it back and away. I'm trying to wipe it at least down here in a horizontal way so that it reflects the plane of the water down there. Okay, I'll just see. Okay. So that's a great little beginning. Now, what should we do? Let's look at the next color. We'll let this dry because this area right in here, we're going to put some purples and other colors in there. So I think what we'll do next is I'm going to mix this the color of the bridge down here. And this whole painting is such a weird painting because first of all, Turner, you know, again, he was a child prodigy, goes to the Royal Academy, and I'm not sure how long he spent there, probably between, let's say, 2 and 3 years, I would have imagined. And then after he leaves school, he does some traveling, and he comes back and he's teaching there. So I think around like the age of 24 or so, he becomes a professor, and he's lecturing, and one of the main things that he's teaching is perspective. And you know, I've taught perspective. I've taught perspective at Emily Carr University, where I teach at, and I've also taught perspective online. There's my free drawing course here on YouTube. You don't have to pay or sign up. You can watch it right now. People seem to really enjoy it. I was reading some comments last night, but I've taught, I think there's about 2 or 3 episodes on perspective, and perspective is how to try to create the illusion of depth on a 2-dimensional piece of paper, right? By using certain kinds of lines which diverge or converge depending on where they are. And so this bridge here, this is Westminster Bridge, and these are the Houses of Parliament. In fact, it's maybe just worth just doing a quick little search here, just so you can see he's completely distorted this this scene. Right, so where would be a view? This is kind of the view that we're looking at here. This is the bridge. The buildings that burnt down were right here. And let's look at the original. Right, so this bridge is like 3 times the height. It looks more like a fortress wall, right? With this, it's really high up, and then the buildings are back down on the. So why he distorted it this way, right? And so he taught perspective for like 20 years at the Royal Academy. What is he doing here? Why does this bridge appear to like change direction on the other side of the water rather than continue here? Why aren't these buildings up here? Why is the water then lower? Is the bridge melting? The bridge didn't melt. It was made of stone. So your guess is as good as mine. There's people have written theories about this. No one is exactly sure why he did it in this particular way. I think what's interesting is that he felt totally free to distort and change things to better suit the idea that he's trying to convey of this utter destruction. So this, maybe it's just worth taking a second here. These buildings started on fire, and over the course of I think about 24 hours, all of these major buildings, this is the seat of government in England, in London, that are burning down, and over the course of the night, like the whole city gathers to watch the buildings burning down. And it's not like today where a whole bunch of helicopters and water planes are dropping water all over it. Like, trying to put these buildings, which are built out of stone and wood, and trying to prevent utter catastrophe is, I mean, we just saw that the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, almost burnt down just a few years ago, and with all of the modern technology that we have today, still most of that cathedral was destroyed. So you could imagine how they were dealt with this situation. It was 1834 this building was burning. So anyway, all these people are gathering and watching, and everyone hears about it, everyone rushes to the water to watch, and certain people are cheering and like, yeah, screw the politicians, right? Because and that is, signals a major change in society at that time. For people to be cheering the destruction of the government is something that would have been unheard of maybe just 50 years before, where the king is in charge, and if you were to cheer the king's palace being destroyed, your own king, you might get your head chopped off, right? Now we have this sort of democracy that is growing in its infancy, and its infancy, and people are celebrating. Not everybody, but there's a lot of people who are bringing down their jug of whiskey and sitting by the water and watching the soldiers and the fire department doing their best to quell the situation, and just laughing. Turner, who's always got a sketchbook with him, takes the sketchbook out. He knows this is an important thing, and he's making these drawings. He's filling up page after page. And not only that, he goes down to the water down here, and he rents a boat to take him as close as possible to the fire, and he's drawing the buildings on fire, and he's sketching away. It gives you an idea of who this guy is. These are spectators. This is probably the most exciting thing many of these people in London had ever seen up until this point. Okay, I'm very excited about this painting and this artist. And I'm probably procrastinating a little bit because I'm just terrified of this whole situation. So let's. I was going to mix this the color here. So let's do that. So the next color I want to mix is this sort of white stone here, and what we're going to do is we're going to mix like a bit of a brown, because we're going to use this warm brown, and we're also going to mix a bit of a gray. So let's start out with our brown. We're going to use a lot of it, so you might as well, in fact, I'm just going to mix a big batch. This is my warm yellow and warm red, right? So here's our orange. And I'm going to start with a very light orange. I mean, we can use this for the fire as well. Basically that same kind of mixture. And take a little bit of that warm blue and mix this together to get a brown. Now this is like a much more orange brown, or yellow dominant brown, warm brown. We're going to do another one where we mix a lot more red into it eventually, but right now we're just looking at the stonework. So I've got this color here going. Let's do, I want to mix my darkest color next. I'm not even going to bother cleaning my paintbrush going to take some of this. In fact, let's take a big batch of that. And a big batch of my cool blue. And now I'm making the darkest color I can make on my palette here. We're going to use this to make like a gray. So mix that together. You know, you could, in theory, just mix, you know, any red, blue, and yellow combination to get this. But I always find the cool yellow, cool blue, and warm red tend to work the best. So right now it's very brown. And if I'm thinking like, I want this to be more gray, more black, this is telling me there's a lot of red and yellow in here. So what is lacking to get it more gray is blue. So I think I might need to squeeze a little bit more blue out of the tube here. And now it's a little bit more blue dominant. Once I mix it up there, it's turning pretty dark gray. It won't be the darkest possible color, but it's going to be pretty darn dark. I often mix this color to do outlines and stuff, and then if I absolutely need to, then I take the black tube of paint that I have. I always think of the black paint right out of the tube as sort of like my fire extinguisher. It's like only to be used in case of emergency. And that's my approach to painting. That's the way I was taught how to paint, and it's frankly a very traditional way of approaching painting. Most of the time, artists would try to kind of make black out using their own colors rather than just painting it directly, because black is such a dominant color. Okay, you saw I was just cleaning my brush. I could use a different brush, but now I'm going to take this white. Where should I do this? Let's do this right here. So I'm going to take my white. Probably going to need a bit more of it, in fact. Not sure why I put it right next to that blue. That's not very smart. Let's take a bit of... In fact, that's even a lot of this brown. Not bad, actually. Because, again, I can do this as a glaze. Well, let's just take a bit of this gray. We don't need a lot, because we want to... Yeah, so that's a lot. So basically what I'm doing, now I've got my blue in there. Okay. Since I got it, let's just do it. Okay. Let's take a bit more brown in here. You could see, like, there's unexpected things happen when you're painting, and that's okay, right? It's not the end of the world. It's just life, right? So that's gonna be that cold blue in there. This is not really the color I want, but I'm gonna use it and then I'm gonna modify on top of it. Because it's not exactly the color I want, I'm going to make it a little bit more... I could mix a different batch, but I just want you to see that we're still talking about making our underpainting here, right? We're not worried about mixing the exact colors until like another hour from now, right? We're just trying to get what we call the underpainting accomplished here. So I mix that glazing fluid in here. And then I'm just kind of wiping a bit off my brush, because I don't want it to be super thick. I want there to be, otherwise it sort of defeats the purpose of putting that glazing fluid in here. Now, I'm not exactly sure why I just started painting it that way. I do want to try to paint the bridge shape in here. There we go. So you can see there's some of the bridge kind of coming through the pencil lines. They haven't been lost completely, they're still there. Just brightening that up a little bit. And then see, he's got a bit of this in the sky, and you can see, like, look how kind of, you know, just almost like nonchalant I am about applying this here, just really quickly smudging things in. Okay, just a bit more down here. So it's transparent enough that I can see some of the pencil lines, especially as it dries. All of these pencil lines are going to come back. Okay. Yes, Pascal says, even the bridge seems full of people watching. Yeah, I mean, remember, this is before Netflix and YouTube. You know, if you, and especially if you were not very wealthy, what forms of entertainment did you have? There might be street performers. There were probably lots of street performers. There was lots of music. Your parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles. I'm sure a lot of people would have had guitars, or if not, well, that might have been a little more expensive, but maybe flutes, handmade flutes that you would make yourself. You know, playing with sticks and percussion, tambourines, that kind of thing would have been very common. But something like this, you know, I mean, even you can imagine if there was any major building burning down in whatever city you're living in, you know, as long as it's not like a terrorist attack, which, you know, at the time people weren't sure of, but people would go and see, like, what's going on. People are people, right? Okay. Now, let's put some, I guess that's almost dry. Let's go for a bit of a purple, I think. Let's do a little light purple glaze. We're not going to need much of it, so I'm going to take a little bit of magenta or cool red and our ultramarine blue. You mix that together and we get this nice, beautiful purple. Now, that's pretty dry, okay. Let's now take some glazing fluid. And the great thing with painting in this technique is, hey, if it doesn't turn out exactly the way you want immediately, just incorporate it. I'm sure when he's painting these types of paintings, he's just like blah, blah, and then, you know, it's almost like at some point it just looks like a bunch of vomit all over, and then he just keeps on working it and shaping it until, you know, it's like a pile of dough, and he's just he's not like, oh, I got that fold wrong, oh, I gotta make a new batch. He's just like, just give it another fold. And right, there's a lot of I feel like very physical with an artist like this, right? So I'm going to take this purple. That's a little bit more bright than I was hoping, so I'm going to put a little bit more glazing fluid in here. I probably should have maybe wiped my brush off before doing this, but let's just keep on going. Isn't all those colors are so gorgeous? Let's put a bit of that over here. You can always just sort of blend that in a little bit, but it doesn't really matter if it's perfect, right? Let's get a bit more of this. Now my brush is getting very dry, so I'm just using that bit of a dry brush in here. Okay. Woo, that's great. So I'll just show you, maybe just worth just zooming in and just seeing the texture here that we've got. You know, those colors, just the way, I mean, it almost makes me want to try to see if I can preserve some of these yellows in here. Okay. So the next thing that I want to do is maybe get a little bit darker, and then I'm going to start kind of adding a little bit of shape in here. So what should we do next? I'm just looking at the original here. Maybe, it's so hard to know with a painting like this what the order of, I imagine next he's probably going to that warm brown, maybe? I think let's do the warm brown. So you remember this color that we used here, or we mixed? I think I'm going to shift down to a smaller brush now. Now that we've sort of got all of this in here, I think it's time to now use a different color. So this here is just warm red and warm yellow. And just kind of just build up. So here's these buildings here. And the far shore. Maybe it's worth, let's just zoom in so you can see. Just smearing all this paint around. Now we've got all these figures here. I'm not going to give anywhere near the amount of detail to these figures that he does. I'm going to keep it mostly just sort of this undefined kind of set of this mass of figures. Okay. So these boats right here. Let's scroll a little bit further. Basically, that's the other side of the painting. I don't think there's less. There's a little bit less of this on the bottom. Figures up here. Almost wish I had done that a little bit lighter. So what if I just take my cloth, dip it in just a bit of water, very carefully, otherwise I'm going to wipe away a bunch of paint, just to kind of give it a bit of a stain here. I did wipe away a little bit of paint. That's okay. And I could be doing a bunch of this as a glaze, because he's like a expert at watercolor, so he's using oil paint in a bit of like a watercolor like fashion. Okay. This big group of people down here. So let's turn this into, let's get a bit of a different kind of color here, get a little bit more red involved. And I'm also gonna put I'm gonna use a bit of glazing fluid here too. Paint all over my fingers somehow. Just taking this a little bit more reddish. Let's get into... Did he smudge his fingers all over the painting? I don't know. Maybe, you know, I get this feeling that he would have just... He was kind of a bit of a messy person. You know, even at the height of his, you know, popularity and renown, he was a, you know, his studio was a disaster. Like, he basically lived in squalor throughout his entire life. And, you know, like, there's a lot of artists that are like that, have these studios that are just complete disgusting heaps of trash and rats and mice, and they're just like, people walk in and are like, oh my goodness, this guy is off his rocker. What is going on here? And even though he was selling lots of paintings, you know, he was it was a character. I don't know how else to put it. All these boats here, just sort of suggesting their shapes. Let's need more of this red up here. Okay. Let's back out and just take a quick look at where we are. So, I think we want to do, I guess, that's some magenta up there. That's interesting. We'll get, maybe they'll do that separately. Or should we do that now? Yeah, let's do a bit of it now. Let's take a bit of this magenta. I'm just going to use the same brush here, put some of that magenta and glazing fluid. You know what? I'm just going to wipe some of that. I think I want it to be a little bit more purely magenta. Excuse me. Where else could I put a bit of this? Just basically getting it off my brush at this point, making some use of it. Okay. It's not going on that clean because there's glazing fluid. When glazing fluid is not fully dry, when you try to paint wet glazing fluid over glazing fluid that's been on there for a few minutes, you end up just wiping that previous layer off, which is usually why I try to let it dry, or I use the air dryer to speed that up. Heidi says, Michael, your approach reminds me of the Thomas Cole painting we did, the view from Mount Holyoke, or Holyoke. Someone from Massachusetts, I'm sure, knows the exact pronunciation of that mountain in that part of the United States there. Okay. Let's go a little bit darker now. So remember we mixed this dark, or should we do? You know what? Before we go there, let's do a darker brown using our warm blue, because this is sort of our last color that we want to add. So if we add some of this dark blue to this color, we're going to get a much darker brown, but it's still a warmer brown. It's not, we haven't gone, in fact, I'm going to take just a bit more. We're going to work our way to that one we just had. Let's get one just a bit more red in here. And you know what? I think I'm going to go to an even smaller brush now. I also think, I just want to show you, I left this paintbrush, after the most recent episode, I put on my brushes, and I forgot to clean my brushes after the most recent episode, and I just think it's helpful for, this is why you want to clean your brushes before you leave at the end of the day, right? So this is just sitting in a jar, and look at that brush. Now this is a cheap, I got this in a set of 4 brushes for $12 or something, so I'm not too concerned about it. But imagine this was a $40 paintbrush and I left it like that, and now you can try to rescue this by soaking it in some hot water and using a brush cleaner to rescue it. But it's just, even a professional like myself has some moments of lack of clarity. Okay, let's the reason I'm going to a smaller brush now is I want to start suggesting some of these details here. So that's the Houses of Parliament. We're not going to paint that with this color, but let's here's the edge of the painting, and I'm on the far left here. So let's think about some of these figures down here. In fact, I'm just going to move that up so you can see where we're at. All right, this is sort of what I'm trying to paint here. In fact, I just think, you know what, let's just start that again. Let me see. When you get kind of in the weeds like this, and then it's like, oh, okay, that's how big these figures are. See how big of a figure I was about to paint in here? They need to be much smaller, about that size. That's helpful to see, right? In fact, that's still a little bit big. Now, Turner, there's so far there's like this wild, expressive, energetic approach to today's painting, and it's really exciting. And then he does like this abrupt shift where he's now going to go into very detailed and glazing and building up all of these areas. Now, I want to try to get this painting done in about the next hour and a half, so I'm going to skip over all of that labor and just kind of suggest a little bit more of what's going on down here. So I'm not going to get some of the faces that we see in here. Mine is going to be very, very generic, just silhouettes of little figures. But again, we're talking about an artist who is really playing with opposing approaches to painting here, to the point where I'm sure he's really probably only concerned about trying to make a good painting, but there's probably a bit of him too that is like doing this as a way of like protecting himself against the inevitable criticism that I'm sure he received, which was that people would say, "Oh well, this is just a big mess. He's just a bunch of splatters of paint," which people did say anyway. But he's able to kind of be like, well, I'm doing exactly what everyone else is doing. I'm doing all the little glazing things that all the other people in the Royal Academy have done, and everything I was taught. And then I'm adding all of this other stuff in there as well that none of you guys have the courage to do and don't even really know how to do because you've never seen it before. I'm the only one doing it. And it didn't stop people from leveling all sorts of criticisms against him that he was, almost like blasphemy with the way that he approached painting. So this is where I am right here, right? I'm not sure. I don't know if this is like a cross, like it's entirely possible at this point in time that certain people would have been like really freaking out and been like, is this the apocalypse? Are we seeing the destruction of the empire? Like, what's going on? All sorts of confusion. Again, it's not like people can just load up Twitter on their smartphone and see the message from the king saying everything's all right. I just knocked over my cigar, and sorry for the trouble, everyone. We'll have it all sorted out by morning. Just go home. There's probably a lot of people who are like, oh my goodness, is the king still alive? I'm sure rumors are just spreading, pun intended, like wildfire. And people are, you see people walking around with like torches to illuminate the scene. So here's all these figures down here now. I'm gonna try to do their back sides. So just FYI, this is this part right here. So I'm just looking at some of these. So I'm just trying to get all this in as quickly as possible, and certainly not, in many ways, not doing much justice to the original. So like Pascal said, you know, there's all these people on the bridge here watching. You know, doesn't it also look like there's people sitting on top of these, the architecture of the bridge, you know, like there's hanging on to the light posts and... Like, I just think I can imagine this kind of thing is burning, and then, you know, probably after a few hours, you know, the chief of police or some kind of military figure is like, go tell all those people to go home, and there's now horses riding down the streets. Okay, everyone, go home, nothing to see here. And people are like, are you kidding me? This is the most incredible thing I have ever seen. What do you mean, go home? Are you insane, man? Like, is the king alive? Of course the king's alive. I'm like, really? How do we know? How do we know that he hasn't been abducted by the French? Or, you know, like, I'm sure there's just all sorts of insanity happening. So now my brush is starting to get kind of dry, and I'm just using it to give a little bit of texture, or not texture, using it to get some of these lines. I'm not worrying about them being perfect, just smudged that around in a way that I'm not too happy with, so I'm just going to take my cloth, dipped it in a bit of water, and just kind of blot it out a bit. Now, it's for me, you know, when I was trying to do the outline for this, I was pretty confused as to what exactly I was looking at here. And, you know, the more I look at it, I still am very confused. And I don't think, I know we talked about what is going on here with the bridge here. Like the bridge, all of a sudden, instead of it's moving in this way, and all of a sudden it gets here and goes down, which it doesn't actually do. So I think it's an invitation to just take some creative liberty to interpret the scene however you want. And, you know, which is very Turner-ish, right? Allowing it to get a little bit strange. You know, this idea of, you know, The Age of Reason was all about rationality and clarity, right? A painting like this could not have been made during the 1700s or 1600s, right? It wouldn't make any, people just wouldn't understand it at all. But in this Romantic period, that kind of ambiguity of these forms is like textbook romanticism, right? That it's like everything's a little bit more nuanced and cloudy, and life is uncertain, and we're not exactly sure anymore about how everything works. We're pretty confident, but there's still a lot of things we don't understand. We're a little bit more suspicious of things, of science and philosophy and reason, etc. I see. Pascal says, I should have went for a yellow background. I went with a light brown. Now I have to add yellow. It's an extra step. I mean, mine is definitely much brighter, and I think ultimately it's going to be brighter than even his was, and I can tone it down. You could still use a light brown, which is, I think, is what he would have done, and he's just building up lots and lots of layers of paint. You know, it's just, you can, I think the way that you're approaching it, Pascal, is even closer to the way that he did it. It just means, you know, I'm trying to cut some corners for the sake of time here, but I don't think you're not at a loss. And we're gonna do more yellow. Like when we get to the actual fire, we're gonna be putting white and yellow, warm yellow, and brightening this whole area up. That's gonna, there's no question about that. But again, it shows that this warm yellow approach that I've been experimenting with over the past year and a half, it works, right? So when I do the restart the intro to painting classes, now I've got 170 or more paintings to kind of support this kind of hypothesis that I've been exploring for a while. There, of course, there'll still be people saying that I'm insane, but that's the internet, right? Okay, so let's go even darker brown here. I just need I'm gonna add a little bit more of my warm colors. And there's Ravi joining us. Nice to see you, Ravi. Had to drop the kiddo off at volleyball, got groceries, and back in the studio. Pascal, interesting. Pascal says, you know, when you do a panoramic photo on your phone and you move the camera and things get a little distorted, maybe he was doing that. I don't know. Is it, again, it's so strange because you think this is a guy who probably was, I mean, he was an absolute expert at geometric perspective. Why would he do such a weird thing to that bridge? Because as a teacher, he would have probably chastised anyone who did that. So, what was he thinking? I think, again, he probably just started painting and was like, ooh, wait a second, what have I done here? I've gotten the bridges way too high. And really the bridge should be, the top of the bridge should be down here. Oh goodness, what have I done? Joseph William Mallard Turner, Joseph Mallard William Turner. What have you done? You've kind of screwed this up, but you know what? I gotta say, I kind of like the way it looks. What if we just went with it? What if I just... Can I make it work as, what's his name on Project Runway used to say? Oh, it's gonna drive me crazy. I just think he was like, you know what? Even though I screwed up on the bridge, let's just keep on going, right? And then maybe it just becomes like this talking piece for 150 years, where people are like, I mean, I love the painting. It looks really cool and wild, but the perspective is all off. And, you know, it's sort of... Sometimes artists deliberately put slightly awkward things into their work in order to make us stop and take a little bit. Like, I'm convinced that Van Gogh did that. Van Gogh, there's some parts of his paintings that are just so weird, or like the faces being like weirdly asymmetrical. And he was he was a very smart guy, and he wasn't classically trained, but I'm sure he knew when something was non-functioning as he might have hoped. And yet he was just sort of like, you know what? Let's just roll with it. Let's keep on going. I'm kind of digging this. So sorry, I'm just mixing up some more browns here, and I'm making some darker brown because I want to go back into these figures. And the reason why I'm kind of mixing and unmixing is I want it to be a brown and not a brownish green. And so that's just because there's a lot of yellow in this paint. That's pretty good. So really, I'm trying to almost bridge the gap. You could see the different browns, and then here's our darkest color, which we may not even need much of. If at all, really, I mean, we'll see. I like the painting like this. I like all the colors that we've got here. Yeah, Pascal says, if the Thames was way larger, it would look like this. It's funny, like, there's I put a link, in fact, let's just mention this really quickly. There's a great little video that Simon Schama did. It's on YouTube. It's from a lecture at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where he's talking about this painting. It's a great little video. Some of the things that I've talked about, or that he talks about in here, Simon Schama, or Shama. Now that I'm thinking about it, like, I think Simon Schama is how you pronounce it. He's very famous for various different documentaries he's done on art. Highly recommend. He's written great books on art history. He's a fantastic personality. He's done a number of. Let's just, while I'm here, let's just do a quick. What is the... Art of the... Is it Art of the Western World? No, there was a whole other... The Power of Art. That's... this is... And I'm sure it's on YouTube. I'm sure there's a bootleg version on YouTube. Excellent series. In fact, there's one here, right, on Turner. He did like an episode focusing on each different artist. It's been probably about 10 years since I've seen this. And they're a great book. I'm a huge fan of his. But sorry, the reason why I'm talking about that is that Pascal mentioned the width of the river, and there's kind of a little funny part in that video that I was just showing, or didn't show, but suggest you watch, because Simon Schama makes a joke of like how Turner made about 10 versions of this painting, both in water. I think he made 2 watercolor or oil paintings, and then probably dozens more watercolor versions. And each one, the Thames River keeps getting wider and wider, and it looks, I think he says it looks like the Amazon River. It just becomes like, you know, this vast space. Okay, so back to reality, Michael. Let's paint. I'm going to now take, let's go to this one, and again, let's put some glazing fluid in here. That way I can keep this paint slightly transparent. And it also makes it a little bit easier if I want to smudge anything with my fingers. And maybe just a bit of something right across here. So just sort of continuing to build up very thin layers of paint so that I can preserve all of these colors in there. And all that, what that does is helps keep a kind of depth in the bottom of the painting. All of these colors, like we're going to do this with some blue here shortly. Just noticing, I think there is another boat or something right here. I'm sort of playing pretty fast and loose with everything here, in case people are like, what? I'm not sure what he's doing and where that's supposed to go. Like, I'm just sort of putting in a little bit of the details here, and now I'm kind of like, okay, I want to get this whole painting done in the next hour at the very latest, so trying to keep one of the reasons I'm just using my finger to smudge around is it's really easy to smudge and kind of blend, and you can get a little bit of nuance. You could certainly do this just adding more glazing fluid, or you could use a rag. I sometimes feel like a rag wipes too much away, so using a bit of my finger kind of helps to preserve a little bit of the... I feel like I have a little bit more control. It's just kind of this smearing of... Okay, let's just see. It's turning out pretty well. I think what I want to do now is I want to get a bit more blue, and this time I'm going to start putting some warm blue into the painting. I don't think we've used warm blue as part of our brown. So let's get some glazing fluid on here. I'm not going to clean my brush. I don't really need it to be clean, but I'm just going to get this warm blue on here. And you can see, because there's a bit of that brown in there, it's not as intense of a color as this would be on its own, right? It's got a little bit of a darker quality. That's because there's brown in it, but just a little bit of brown, and it's just muddying up this blue. Now, ultramarine blue is generally a very transparent color, one of the most transparent colors. Blues are usually pretty transparent. So even though it looks pretty dark here, as I paint with it, things are gonna thin down significantly. So let's go start on the right side here. So we can just kind of go into here. So we're kind of in this area, I think, right about in here. This for to do most of the architecture. Give it this little bit of blue. It almost looks like a gray. Again, there's all these little faces and people in here. I'm not going to spend too much time trying to capture them at all. I just want to get the feeling of this painting. So it kind of goes on kind of bright blue, but very quickly as it dries, or if I smudge it a bit with my fingers, it sort of becomes a much like more of a gray kind of subdued color here. What this is doing is also really bringing the shore that is right next to us. We're on, I'm not sure what I'm trying to think of geography. I'm not sure what's let's just say for our purpose the south side of the water here. What it is also doing by putting this warm blue, even in a kind of diluted glaze, it's really pulling that shore closer to us and pushing the far shore away. So that's a great benefit of using these warmer colors in the foreground, is even if you don't use perspective, all of a sudden everything just seems to, there's a depth that is created in these paintings. And Turner, more than almost any other artist, really uses these warm and cool colors to create depth in his paintings. And so we can just keep on going on and on and on with this. I want to be done here in about 45 minutes, so I'm just gonna, I'm skipping over a few things here. This area, the far cloud, so we're gonna use our dark color that we made originally that's got a lot more cool blue in it, and that's gonna help push that into the background. So we're using different blues for different parts of the painting to help create more depth. So my brush, you know, how I'm using this paint is, you can see here's a bunch of wet paint, but I'm not using that wet paint. I sometimes grab some of that wet paint, put it on my brush, and then kind of, before I paint with it, I'm kind of almost wiping it all off. So I just sort of like get a little bit on my brush, and then I kind of wipe a little bit off. That way it doesn't take very long for my brush to get dry when I'm painting. And usually, you know, the way that paint is, it's going to kind of go up into the bristles. So even though the tip might be a little bit wet, if I push down, let's say, where can I do this? On the bottom part of the brush, more wet paint kind of squeezes out, and then I can blend a little bit with that. So I'm putting these kind of curving lines into these, I don't know, columns, I guess they are. So I'm on the edge of the painting. I guess that's not really there. I just invented this thing here now that I look at it, but that's okay. go over to the other side. Darken in these figures even more. I don't know what's going on in this little thing here. It looks to me almost like a wagon or something that people are in. Maybe people were either fleeing or coming there as tourists to check it out. I don't know. Maybe I'm going to put a bit more glazing fluid in the paint here so that I can glaze a little bit more freely without having even to smudge with my fingers. I can take some of this. That's pretty, almost a little bit too much, so just take a bit more paint and bring it back in here. Right, it just sort of like brings a little bit more back into the painting. Oh, I'm starting to pull up some of the paint here. I'm applying this a little bit heavy, so I really should have waited until all this was dry, but I'm just kind of in a bit of a hurry. So I think, yeah, let's let's just take a look at these side by side at this point, actually. So next, what I want to do, I want to do a little bit more. I certainly want to darken down here a little bit more, but I got to wait for this to dry, and I can just use like 3 or 4 passes. I could take a big brush, dip this in this paint, which is like got 5% blue in it or 10% blue, and just keep on, you know, I could paint this like that, blow dry it or let it dry, do it again, and that whole area is going to get darker and darker and then come more forward, right? And that's going to, which will then have the opposite of effect of pushing the background further away, right? So it's just that manipulating those warm and cool colors that are going to create more and more depth in the painting. Similarly, we're going to put in some darker, basically our dark color here, dark, which has got this cold blue in it. In fact, let's start doing some of that right now. I'm just going to use a smaller brush. So here's my glazing fluid. I'm just going to, you can see I didn't mean to scoop up all of this warm or cool blue in there, but it's going to be fine because I want it to be dark anyway, and I want it to be cool. So I can take this color, this kind of grayish thing, and I can also just kind of brush it onto the buildings here. Because I want this is a dark, this is my colder blue, so I want more of that on the other side of the shore if possible. Okay, let's get even more of that. Now, I kind of like what's happening in here with these yellows, so I want to just be careful about obliterating that. It's different than what he did, for sure. The only thing is it doesn't make sense for this to be glowing warm yellow on the other side of this, of the bridge. So maybe I will paint a bit of it out. Okay. You know, maybe I'm going to take some of this cool blue and I'm mixing it into this dark color. So this is a little bit more of an intense cool blue here. Take that and bring this up into the sky here like we had. Okay, I think I'm going to blow dry this because I've got a lot of semi-wet glazing fluid on there, and I keep scrubbing some of it off when I'm painting, and it's causing a little bit of frustration. So I don't want frustration, you don't want frustration, so 30 seconds with the blow dryer, the frustration goes away and it's happy time. Okay. I'm gonna do that again in the sky with this cold blue up here. It's because it's so beautiful and rich, and I'm not worried about brush strokes in here. I just like which direction should the brush strokes be going in. That's really the only thing that I'm thinking about. Not if, but how. Oh, looks like I've got my special guest making an appearance. Hi, kiddos. Oh, I gotta just move this out of the way for a
Oh, sorry.
No, I just
thought we'd come say hi to Daddy. Can I say hi to Daddy?
Come say hello. Oh, we gotta watch out for your head because you're getting so big. This is my daughter, Edie. This is our daughter. Look at you, barely fit in the picture anymore.
I just woke up.
Oh, look how tall you are. You make me so sad. You're growing up too fast. Look at what Daddy's working on here. That's Daddy's job, is to just color. Yeah, isn't that exciting? Wow. It's gonna get much more, there'll be a lot more yellow in this area. It's gonna get really, it's like, see on the screen there? It's gonna be a building on fire.
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
I hope everyone's having fun painting.
Okay, wave to everybody. Have a good afternoon painting, everybody. I'm gonna go have a snack.
Bye. Say bye, Dada.
Everyone's saying hi to you guys.
Mom says hi. We say hi back. Merry happy holidays.
Okay. So the other thing I want to do is, remember I said we could put a big warm area down here. Let's do a little bit of that. So I'm going to take a little bit of my warm blue and some glazing fluid. Just a little bit more in my brush each time. You can go like as timid as you want to be or as bold as you want to be. That's the great thing with glazing fluid. Like if we have them side by side here. Also go into this area here. I'm just adding kind of like little nuance to everything here. And what's great is by doing little things like that, I'm modifying some colors. Some colors seem to get kind of more intense that way. They just sort of kind of come alive. And we're going to be doing a little bit of that with the yellow here shortly. We're just kind of building up to it here. Okay. So, I think I'm just debating at what point should we go in with the yellow. I think I'm sure Turner probably spent another few weeks building detail in here. I think he was painting probably as quickly as I'm painting. The canvas he's painting on is about almost a meter wide, right? So it's, I think it was like 90 centimeters by like 120 centimeters, which is, like I think 50 inches kind of thing by 45. In fact, let's just, instead of me just speculating on this, not speculating, but I thought I had a... Oh, I think it's in here somewhere. Oh yeah, so both paintings are 92 centimeters by 100. So I was 2 centimeters off, right? So 36 inches by 48 inches. So big paintings, and they're arm's length wide for a lot of people. So there's a lot of detail in here, and we're trying to go relatively quickly. Okay. Oops. So, you know what I think I'm going to do is I'm just going to blow dry all of this, because I'm going to start putting some yellow on here, and even though I'm going to... I don't mind if I get a little bit of green, but the blue and yellow are going to make green when they mix. That's going to happen a little bit when I glaze with some of the yellow. But especially if I put a little bit of white in there, it's going to block some of that optical color mixing. So I'm just going to keep the colors from actually physically mixing on here, I'm going to... Oops. So I was just looking at the original and thinking like I need to add a little bit of paint here before I move on. A little bit of this kind of magenta, I think, needs to come back in between these Parliament buildings here. So let's take some of our magenta, and I'm going to glaze with it. I'm not afraid of this color being a little bit more intense than the original. His is like you know, this is maybe, you know, if that's 100% magenta, we're looking at maybe 40% magenta. He's probably at like 5% magenta. But why not just let it get wild? Put that into the other side here. In fact, I'm going to put it into a lot of this area. Again, we're about to put big gobs of white, or yellow with white in here, so it's going to cover a lot of this, especially in this area here. So I don't mind kind of, because I might want to have a little bit of this kind of poking through. Okay, and again, I'm going to blow dry this. Okay, oh my goodness. So let's bring some of this, the warmth, the intensity back into this painting. It's always a little, you know, I'm just thinking about time-wise. I will use my palette knife to finish off the painting. But just it'll if I put gobs of paint now and then try to wait for it to dry to glaze or anything over top, then it's going to take 20 minutes of blow drying. So instead, I'm going to kind of build up to that. So just clean some brushes off here momentarily. Let's go for a smallish brush. So that white is kind of almost dry, so let's squeeze a bit more out. So I'm taking this white, and I think I'm going to mix it over here. Well, maybe that's a lot. So let's just take that. Let's take our warm yellow. Okay. Even more white. So it's going to be pretty opaque. It's going to be slightly transparent because I don't want to lose all of the beautiful color that we've just spent all this time building up. But we do want to bring back the intensity of the light. This is my warm yellow and some white. So I'm just putting a bit on because I expect there to be some reflection on there. I don't see, you didn't do too much of this. It's a bit more of my own little addition, I guess, to the painting, but let's build up to that a bit more. So this is what I was saying, Pascal. I wouldn't worry so much about getting the yellow on here, because we can add a little bit of white and bring it back. We're going to be adding warm yellow back on top of all of those colors here shortly. I put a bit of white in there just to help. If I just put warm yellow on top of here, it'll kind of disappear. A bit of this white will help make it pop again. The brush is very dry, but it's just barely leaving some pigment on here. What's nice is you can see almost, it looks like, you know, like these ambers that are flying through the air that are going to land on something and catch fire and make things even worse than they already are. These sort of like little windows and things in here. I might paint these out or back again later. It just gives the sense that there's like this blaze going on inside. I'm not sure what's going on right down here. I'm just going to add it a little bit of detail just to just using the paint off this brush here. sort of dry off that brush a bit. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Maybe I should have just left those figures alone. Okay. So let's zoom back out on both of these. So now let's put in some warm yellow without white in there at all. John says, stunning, Michael. I appreciate that. Lolly says, considering you were a little hesitant, nervous about tackling such a great masterpiece, you're absolutely smashed it, Michael. Looks amazing. Pascal says, yes, it's pretty nice. I gave up 40 minutes ago, or I put it on ice, to be continued. Absolutely. There's no, you don't have to do it all at once. I just do it all at once just because, you know, we're filming it and I want to try to do it all, but you know, as I said, Turner certainly did do this all in one session. Did it over a longer period of time. Okay, so I'm taking my warm yellow. This is warm yellow. It's been sitting on the palette for I don't know how long, right? Adding some glazing fluid to it to make it just a little bit more transparent. On its own, it's one of the maybe more opaque colors, but it's still going to have some transparency to it. And this is just adding a little bit more to it. And then let's, gotta be kind of bold here. Throwing it back on here. It's like painting it right over top of some of that, the little bit of the white makes it kind of sticks out a little bit more, right? Which is the whole point. Oh, look at that. Wow. What a fire. Whoa. Do we want to do any more? Be careful about going too far on there. Okay. I don't like how I painted those faces down here, so let's just remove them entirely, give them a little bit of brown back in there. Just all that little's gone. Come on, a bit more of brown in that water down here. I mean, I've certainly got a lot more color going on in here, brighter colors, colors that weren't even accessible to him when he was making this painting, right? Like, these bright, you know, this intense cool blue didn't exist. I still think I'm going to make this, I want to get this a little bit darker to give the appearance of the intense, thick smoke that's coming out of there. Otherwise, we're getting pretty close. I could do another pass of warm blue down here. So let's, I do think what I want to do is just take a little bit of warm blue that's left, or warm red that's left over here. And this is I can't remember, I don't know the exact the architecture of the Houses of Parliament there, but this is, you know, some sort, like, I think the cathedral aspect to the Houses of Parliament, which this area right here was the only part that didn't burn down, which obviously some people ascribe to being like a sign from God that, you know, the faithful were protected versus the corrupt politicians. Their buildings were destroyed. So putting a little bit of this orange back in there just also acts as a bit of like it actually helps make the fire a little bit hotter, more intense. Put even a bit of more red in here. So let's just take even more of this warm red. Get it into the color here. I'm going to take a bit more of it, and I see what he's doing in the foreground too, almost giving some of these people right at the front of the crowd a bit more. I think I got a glaze with some warm red, but like their faces and bodies are kind of glowing red as they stare at the fire there. I see little bits of red on some of these torches in here. Okay. What is that? Never noticed that before. Was that there the whole time? Okay. Let's take some of this yellow and white and come back. Let's zoom in. So it just gives it that illusion that there's just fire just burning at full intensity inside there. That, so let's just wipe it away a little bit. Okay, now I was promised I was going to use my palette knife, so I'm going to use the palette knife. And what should I do here? It's a bit of a peachy thing going on now that I look up at this area here. So let's zoom out. You know, I'm not very good at using a palette knife, so this is not my preferred technique for doing this kind of thing, but it is kind of fun to experiment with. And you know, I'm just getting some of it in here, and if I get a little too much, it's okay. So that's I think that's as much experimentation with the palette knife I'm going to do at the end. He did a lot more of it. I'm going to keep some of that. I'm probably going to blur a little bit of it out here in a bit. But what I want to get is these like ambers that are flying around in the air. So I'm going to go back with my warm yellow and just sort of integrate a bit of this. A bit more of this white right above the sort of central part of this bonfire here. Sort of like a, you know, these arcs, like flickers of, like fingers of flame coming up. Okay, almost done. I tried a little bit of the palette knife. It's, you know, you only get better by practicing with it. You know, and the stakes might feel really, really high at the very end of a painting like that. But, you know, if there's any artist who gives you permission to go a little bit wild, Turner should be certainly one of them, for sure. So let's just, I think I want to get a little bit more smoke into that sky right in this area. So we're just going to glaze a little bit with, so let's put some glazing fluid on here first. That way we can, and let's take a bit of our dark color, mix it into here. This dark color again is cool blue, warm red, and cool yellow. And that's how we get this really dark. It's basically a black. Let's zoom back in. And I've got a lot of bright colors in here. This might just kind of tone them down a little bit, not kill them all, because I like these colors. They're not going to go anywhere. They'll still be there. It's just maybe we want in this area lots of contrast, right? Because that's where all the heaviest amount of smoke is billowing out of. The more contrast you have, the more intense that heat is going to feel. All right, so I'll let that dry. While that's drying, I just think, okay, is there anywhere else that could use a bit more of that darker color? I guess we could put a bit of it in the water. His overall scene is much darker than mine, way more intense contrast. Maybe I have a little bit of extra space on the left side of my canvas here, so maybe I'm just going to take this dark color and also put it on the left side. That's also going to help give more intense smoky kind of feeling there. And I think I'm going to darken the right side as well, like he's done here with this same color. I need a little bit more glazing fluid, so just mix a bit more of this. Because on this side of the bridge, like this whole scene is sort of, well, the fire goes all night long, so it's your guess as good as mine as to like what time of day this scene is in this version, in this painting. Like the sky is relatively bright, but it's also maybe illuminated by the smoke, or the light, obviously, right? I'm a little zoomed in too close here, so let's zoom back out. Okay, so I'm going to blow dry this, and I might just do one more pass at my darkest area here. Okay, so let's do this one more time. A little bit more of our darker color. Again, I'm also going to darken this over here just to help give it even more contrast. And I'm going to darken this over here. Don't know how much more of that I want to do. I want to take a bit of the magenta, so I've got lots left over, and I'm just going to add a little bit on these like burning embers here. I think I'm gonna also just do one more pass at the warm blue in the bottom down here. I don't know how much more I can do on this. I think I've gotten pretty close. Just adding just a little bit more of this magenta right around the outside of these buildings to, again, give it that just glowing intensity coming There. It's more than he did. But obviously there's all sorts of discrepancies, right? The point is not to make the exact same painting, but to learn from what he did and then use it as potential inspiration to go your own direction beyond that. You know, as I look, before I wrap up, what is he doing right down here? And do I want to capture any of that? Like, it kind of almost looks like all these people are kind of marching over the bridge and then down here into the glee of the inferno or something. So I just want to get a tiny flavor of something happening in here. Just some... This is my warm yellow with a little bit of white. Right, isn't there something weird? There's something weird going on over there. And I imagine that's, you know, something that he's thinking, like as he's working on the painting, he's probably thinking like, what could I put over here? Wouldn't it be funny if all of these people were like moths to the flame? They're just, you know, they just trying to get closer and closer. Okay, I think that's enough. So, way more color. Mine's, you know, in here this water is quite green. His is more subdued. And there's all this bright purple in here, and that blue in the sky is way more intense than his. And there's obviously lots of detail in here which I've removed. So there's significant differences, but I think I've captured the essence of this painting, which is what I want to do anyway. Okay, so let's start wrapping up here. On Sunday, this Sunday, what is today? Before I, okay. We're going to do another feedback episode where I'm going to take a look at all the art that you guys have been looking at, and lots of you have been uploading a lot of stuff recently, so there's lots of stuff for us to look at and celebrate. Let's Well, I gotta say, it turned out a little bit differently than I was expecting, but I'm happy. I'm happy with the results. To take on Turner, anyone who's joined me and attempted to paint this painting, I congratulate you for your effort. Whether it looks exactly like mine or Turner's is, I think, irrelevant. As long as you're sort of learning a little bit about how the colors are working, how we can get the really nice contrast to simulate the fire, is, I think, ultimately where we want to get to. And then you can do another version of it, applying sort of some of the things you've learned, and you just get better and better and better the more and more paintings you make, right? Okay, so thank you everyone for joining me for this episode. If you liked it, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you know when new videos are coming. I don't know when we're going to be live on Saturday. In fact, I'm not sure how that's going to work. So, I don't know. So you hit that notification bell so you know when the videos are going to be live. I'm here every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific time here on the West Coast of North America. If you want to leave a donation to help support the show, there's the Super Chat function here in YouTube if you're watching me live. There's also a PayPal link in the description below, and you can also contact me directly through my website or the Facebook group, which I encourage you to join. Upload your version of today's painting so we can look at it this weekend, or anything else you've been working on. We'll see you guys in a few days, and as we get closer to Christmas, we got lots of cool paintings we're going to be doing, so if you're stuck at home and wondering what to do during the holidays, it can be sad for some people, so join me and celebrate Christmas and the holidays with me. I'll be here for you. We'll see you guys very soon. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night, everybody.